Hello, my name is Dr. Aine Phillips. Thank you to NUI Galway, Burren College of Art, and the Art and Society conveners for inviting me to present my work at this conference. In this presentation, I will show how my practice, especially with a rural focus, impacts my approaches to teaching at Burren. I would like to give you some background to my art engagements with the rural context. My practice in art and research has been an abiding interest in art and activism in the rural context, especially in relation to women in the rural, women and landscape, women's history and lived experience. For 20 years, I lived with my young family in East Clare while teaching at the Burren College in West Clare. I sought to integrate my work with my life, my teaching and art practice, my interest in experimental contemporary art and performance practices. I will show you some projects I created in, from and with the landscape that inform my teaching and current classes at Burren. In the early 2000s, I was a founding member of Ground Up Artists Collective in County Clare. We were a group of young contemporary artists who found ourselves living in rural Clare, isolated from art world centres, audiences and opportunities. We were based in remote rural Ireland for many reasons, among them being affordable housing and a space to make art, raise families and live holistically in a natural environment. We placed the experience of a meaningful connection to nature at the centre of our lives and art practices. We wanted to address our work to the rural and geographically isolated audience who would normally not encounter contemporary art. Over 10 years, I worked with this dynamic group, who included Fiona Woods, Sean Taylor, Deirdre Monaghan, among others, and we created innovative projects that were located in the rural, both physically and philosophically, addressing key themes and issues we felt were relevant and prescient. Here are some of our projects. Fiona Woods animated local vernacular agricultural architecture with vibrant pink neon lights. Sean Taylor floated a hot air balloon over the Burren with the blushing hills inscribed on its belly, a localism describing the colour of the hills with the heather in full bloom. Deirdre Monaghan created the XPO, a pioneering community arts centre in Kilnaboy's disused post office. In 2003, I created Shelter in Memory, a series of 3 small timber frame lean-to shelters on the sites of Killini, unconsecrated children's burial grounds, which were often located on liminal sites on the edge of land and water. They were primarily used for stillborn and unbaptised infants. Burials were performed in some Clare Killini up to the mid-1990s, and there was a stigma against women entering the sites, due in part to the historical suppression and control of female reproductive experience in Ireland. Given that these sites were the location of women's deceased children, whether by abortion, miscarriage, or neonatal death, and normal cultural ceremonies and acknowledgements of mourning were prevented, I wanted to create these shelters that allowed for grief rituals to take place with a sense of consideration for the bereaved and commemoration for those who had lost their young lives and were so ephemeral in this. Importantly, all these projects and others were disseminated in publications, conferences and exhibitions subsequently, such as the Shifting Ground Symposium series at GMIT and Burren College of Art, 2006 to 2007. In 2010, I curated A20 public art projects in rural East Clare with artists who I had worked with at Burren College as teachers or students, including Emma Houlihan, Tom Flanagan, and Marie Knoll, among others. With similar intentions to the earlier Ground Up projects, these works intended an engagement with rural audiences and the generation of relationships between creative practitioners and rural sites, rural audiences and participants. We had further ambitions to disseminate this work in urban centres, promoting the remote work we were doing and creating potential links between rural and urban by commissioning work for digital and film platforms as well as publication. These projects were incorporated into our teaching and pedagogy at Burren College of Art in the form of artists' talks, film screenings, and seminars. The purpose of these projects was to animate the rural using contemporary art to reimagine political, social, cultural understandings and lived experience of the rural, as well as possible rural futures. That was especially in relation to the work of Emma Houlihan. These projects arose out of a sense that rural life and experience was judged harshly by urban. Fiona Woods pointed out in 2006 as part of the Shifting Ground series. The prevailing cultural discourse, I argued, does not view rural culture as legitimate, but as naive and inadequate. While I have often heard artists and curators speak of the need to educate rural populations in the language and aesthetics of contemporary art, I have rarely heard artistic practitioners speak of the need to educate themselves in the rural. This attitude was characterised recently in the Irish Times by Hugh Lenihan. He wrote, "The truth is that some of us just don't care for the country, all those cows, and have little time for the goofy pastoralism which sentimentalises rural life." Artists living and working in the rural suspect their work is seen through this lens, and we are avidly campaigning now that this work is recognised as vital for all, rural and urban dwellers alike, in a more connected understanding of our earth and environment as locus for all life. Cities are located within the landscape that feeds and nurtures us too. Another project I developed was Tree Girls from 2009 to 2013. Tree Girls were live portraits of lost and missing girls and women. The project explored our relationship with trees and plant life, or botany, and anthropomorphism, as a way to connect and engage more intimately with the natural world and with its botany as living beings just like us. This project sought to connect human tragedies and loss to the living environment that gives us consolation and succour, as well as being the ultimate representation of renewal, transformation, and perpetuity. Teaching art and the rural. My rural projects developed in tandem with teaching at Burren College of Art, and over the years my classes evolved to reflect the principles and issues I was researching and motivated by. My art projects became the content for my classes and still are. Performance in the Landscape is a course that explores the connection of our bodies to nature, our lived experience and behaviour, our actions and gestures. We examine new correlations with landscape and new ways of imagining landscape art beyond the traditional conventions of a painting with midpoint horizon line and bucolic scenery. Translating the environment into new forms of representation helps us to understand the environment and our entanglements with it in a new way. Two years ago, Burren College of Art Dean Conor McGrady suggested we develop a module focused on the act of walking in the landscape, and we designed Walking as Art Practice, a course that centres on the act of walking and all its modes: drifting, sauntering, strolling. The philosophic inquiry engages with theories of how we navigate space, looking at ideas spanning the 19th century flaneur to the Situationists International in the 1960s, to present-day ideas of psychogeography, which is the intersection of psychology and geography and focuses on our psychological experiences of traversing space and in Walking as Art Practice and in the rural, we explore the experience of getting lost, rambling, falling, stumbling, tramping. Rebecca Solnit wrote, "Walking articulates both physical and mental freedom. Spending more time outdoors nurtures our nature neurons and our natural creativity. For example, at the University of Michigan, researchers demonstrated that after just an hour interacting with nature, memory, performance, and attention spans improved by 20%. I spoke earlier about the integration of life with art, and this is one of the basic principles of my teaching practice at the college. I aim to show students how to converge their lived experience with art practice. We are located in a unique landscape and ecology, and this primary reality becomes the foundation for the creation of art. We need art to make sense of the world, to narrate and translate the world and our lived experience so we can understand it better. For example, this time of COVID particularly is so strange and abnormal that we definitely need art to make sense of it, philosophically, aesthetically, and experientially. I think the world needs examples of creative experimental practices in the rural and fresh paradigms for conducting our relationship with nature, the rural and landscape. We need to find ways to articulate new understandings, and art gives us the potential to do this. As we know, our planet and the balance of nature has been compromised by humanity's alienated and exploitative approach to landscape. Let us foster artistic, creative, enlightened relationships and mutually developmental ways of engaging with our environment for the future.